Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Future of BizTech. I'm your host, JC Granger, and I have another fantastic guest on the show with us today. And listen, if you end up loving this episode, please show your love and appreciation by following this podcast wherever you're listening. And be sure to give it a 5-star review, preferably with some comments in there. That always helps the algos, because that is how other techies like you and I find cool podcasts like this. So today, I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing Alexander Ambirikos, who is the co-founder and CEO of Remotion.com. Alexander, thank you so much for being on the show. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what it is that you guys do.
Cool. Thank you so much for having us, JC. Really appreciate it. So I'm the CEO of a company called Remotion. We're a B2B SaaS company that helps leaders just like you build closer, more effective teams, and especially engineering teams. The way that we do it is we build something that we call a virtual office that helps teams feel connected and foster those missing casual conversations that you don't get when you're working remotely anymore. Quick backstory about me. I came to the States for college, funnily enough, because I wanted to build military aircraft. Ended up getting into tech instead, was like a product manager at Dropbox, 3 years, very formative experience. From there, started a gaming company, completely failed. As I was wandering the desert to figure out what I wanted to do, I started working with another co-founder. We were working on something else, but he moved to Chicago. This is a little before COVID. Mm-hmm. And we're like, wow, we really want to work together. But all the advice says we shouldn't co-found a company remotely. And we don't like all the advice of how to do it. There's got to be a problem here. We started looking into it, built Remotion on the side, and Remotion ended up becoming the main thing. Half a year later, COVID hit. And it's been a pretty wild journey since then.
That is, lucky but unfortunate timing, right? You know, nobody wants a pandemic, but it sounds like your software became very relevant in a short amount of time, I imagine. So, you know, what is it about? I mean, a lot of people are probably going to think, okay, well, what's the difference between what your software does versus just people getting on like Zoom meetings? Like, you know, paint us the picture. I'm curious, you know, what kind of features are expanded into it to allow a better collaboration remotely?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so there's a lot of like really awesome research about this. And I think that there's going to be even more great research over the upcoming years. But when you look at what people find hard about working remotely, it's not actually getting work done. Like a lot of people are getting even more work done than before. The challenges for individual contributors tend to be like maybe loneliness, especially if you're younger, like you're out of school, right? Like you moved to a city so that you could like make friends and now like you can't, right? That sucks. Maybe it's forming new relationships, onboarding, maybe teams changing up. And so when we look at what is it about the office that helps that happen, it's not actually the fact that you're sitting in the same room or something. It's the fact that you can have conversations outside of your transactional meetings, right? There's like maybe 21 bouts of small talk throughout a week for an average person in an office. And that's what's missing when you're remote. Those conversations lead to trust. Trust leads to higher productivity. So as a leader, like you're trying to build trust in your team and you have Zoom. Zoom is great for getting work done, but it's not leading to those smaller trust building conversations. And, you know, we've seen a bunch of leaders hosting like happy hours week after week, and it works well the first 2 weeks, and then people stop showing up, right? And there's sort of a limit to what you can do with like scheduled programming. And that's why we think, hey, you used to have an office and now you need a virtual office. So happy to talk about the features.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because, okay, so, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, because a lot of people have, let's say, Slack, for example, right?
Right.
But those are typically going to be more professional talks. Are you saying that essentially one of the features is that it allows people to have completely unrelated, like work, you know, personal work discussions, whatever, you know, in a format like on their screen where they can just kind of chit chat, like, you know, like water cooler style? Like, is that kind of what you're saying as well, to kind of help create that more personal connection?
Yeah, basically, our goal as a company is to create the space for conversations of between like 2 and 3 people. So like small, not the whole company. Conversations between 2 and 3 people where you talk about something that wasn't like pre-planned or transactional. So it could be like, hey, how are your kids? Could be, hey, how's your dog? It could also be like, hey, what's the latest on this project as well? Like, that's fine. But we view success is when we've had those conversations start happening on your team where they weren't happening as much before. Funnily enough, like if you look at the statistics, when COVID started, there was like an uptick in the amount of emails that were sent across teams by like 25%. And that lasted for about 3 months. And this is across industries, not just tech. People were like, okay, we're going to email more because like we're not getting stuff done, right? And that didn't last. It was like super tiring. And then what we ended up with instead is an increase in video meeting load by like 20%, right? No surprise, 6 months later, Zoom fatigue hits and everyone's like, I don't want any more video calls, right? And so we still haven't figured out how to get those small group casual conversations going. And that's what we enable. I'll tell you the story. We spent a lot of time iterating and figuring out how to enable that. Fun fact, water cooler conversations, like those don't actually work. Everyone's tried like water cooler stuff, and there's just people just don't use them. It doesn't make sense when you're remote.
That's interesting. So then does your software also include the ability for the actual professional conversations? Like, I guess, for example, is it a separate software? Like we have Slack, right? Okay. So would your software though be like, okay, well, you can transfer to this, which is like Slack, you can do all your professional stuff and you can still operate like a regular company, but then it additionally has these more personal features to it? Or is it like, no, it's a whole separate thing?
No, that's like kind of a great end state that we're aiming for. But if you think about when Slack was first adopted, like I don't know when you folks got on Slack, maybe if Slack was probably dominant. I mean, it's been dominant for ages. But when teams were first adopting Slack, they weren't thinking, hey, we're gonna like move our entire like, I don't know, Yammer or over to this, right? They were just like, oh, like these other people at my workplace are like laughing about these GIFs that are being sent around, and like I'm missing out. So I want to download this tool too, so I'm not missing out on the GIFs, right? And then over time, they get adoption for that. And then it's like, well, actually, it's a pretty good tool. Let's do more and more work in here. And then Slack slowly took over that way. And now Slack is like, if you start a new company, what are you going to do? You're going to like register your company, whatever, and you're going to open a Slack, right? So that's kind of the approach that we're taking here. Remotion can help your team be more productive. And when the pandemic first hit, that was actually how we were marketing our tool. It was like, hey, this is going to help your team more productive by enabling shorter conversations that are unscheduled, so you can cancel those meetings. But what happened is, as teams started figuring out how to work remotely during the pandemic, as all our competition got their act together, and as people were Zoom fatigued, the value proposition of being more productive through more short conversations started to be really bad. It wasn't even like a neutral value proposition. People like actively did not want it. And this is something we kind of expected, although it happened faster than we thought. And now what we're building is, we're solving for the thing that people know is the hardest problem, which is, hey, how do I connect with my team? Or as a leader, how do I structure an environment where my team can naturally build relationships? And eventually, when teams adopt Remotion, they start doing all their work in Remotion. But we don't pitch it that way at all now. We're just hey, this like, is part of your team building diet. Like, you're going to do a happy hour once a month.
Progresses in that way.
Totally. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So who's your perfect type of client? I mean, I know you obviously could, something like this could work with any industry, but like, who do you guys really like working with, or which industry do you find has been gravitating towards this more than others?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it's actually been kind of interesting making that choice. We have customers from all over the world across a variety of industries, from like architecture, even legal firms, and of course, tech firms. But as we've been sort of looking at the numbers and figuring out what works best, it's pretty clear right now that our focus should be on tech firms or tech adjacent firms, like, firms, maybe like your firm would still make sense for us, right? Even though you're not like a pure software play. And then within those, the size that makes the most sense for us at the moment is somewhere between like 11 and 80 people, somewhere in that range, pretty wide range, but not less than 10 people. And 250 plus, we have some customers, but it's harder for the Remotion to work there. And then it's a multiplayer product, but the person who we need to champion our product tends to be a leader, someone who's actually thinking about how the team works and the team culture on a day-to-day basis. So if I was going to tell you my perfect person, find me an engineering co-founder at like a 50-person company who thinks about their team's culture, and I would love to talk to that person. Okay. And they will. What
about like sales managers, right? Because I know that the sales departments sometimes struggle, especially remotely, to have those kind of relationships. And because they're very active, like, and those personalities are very active, and those personalities typically struggle more being remote than most. So what about sales?
Totally. So the sort of the top three functions that use Remotion are so engineering first, then sales, and then operations, like, customer support or something. So sales is right up there. Now, hopefully I'm not going to offend anyone on this podcast, and I'm sure you'll edit me out if this is going to be offensive. But one of the dynamics we've observed is that at a 50-person company or 80-person company, we start in one function and then the entire company is on Remotion, right? But how that works depends on who uses Remotion first. So I'm a product manager by training. And let me tell you something. You ask an engineer if they want to spend more time talking to me, and they don't.
Oh, yeah. That's what I was like, you just said
I want to talk to everyone, right? So
I was like, engineering wants to talk to people?
So here's the thing. And again, this is, we're having fun with this, but nobody wants to spend more time talking to their PM. And so if you have the PM champion a communication tool, no one's down.
Yeah.
Right. But everyone wants to spend more time talking to the people who are building the software at a software company. Right. The PMs want to talk to them. The designers want to talk to them. The salespeople want to talk to them too.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, true.
And
Because
so
they get questions from their prospects that they can't answer. Yeah.
Totally. So the reason that we like targeting engineering so much is because they are a nexus from which we can grow. We actually have some really successful sales deployments at even bigger companies too, but we've noticed that those tend to stay more within sales and they don't tend to spread to other orgs as much, I think because of these dynamics we just talked about.
I bet you didn't see that happening when you first started the software. I mean, I bet that had to be like a really interesting discovery, right?
No, it was super interesting. And, this is I guess my second startup, but the first one failed so badly. I think of it as my first. And, for me, it's been kind of interesting because at the beginning I was like, yeah, like Remotion is for anyone who works remotely. And I wasn't thinking about like which function should we land at. I wasn't thinking about what company size made sense. It was just like anyone should use this. And it's sort of been an increase in discipline that we've been gradually building that helps us distribute the product better and also build better features.
What is good that you have your target demographic down. I mean, it takes time, right? I mean, I started my agency like 11 years ago. And, we started off just like every other agency doing everything for everyone, right? Because they kept asking for more stuff. Like we actually only started off with one service, but we just kept saying yes, 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 yes. And then eventually, that growth curve kind of starts to peak and then you're like, all right, now you kind of want to start saying no, 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 right? And then you start dialing on exactly like who your perfect audience is. So I get that. I had a feeling that there's no way you anticipated engineering being the department that was going to end up being the growth point in an organization, but I follow the logic, right? There's no way I would have called that. I would have lost all my money if I had had to bet on it, right? So that's really, I think that's super interesting and it makes sense. So on that note, then let's talk. I mean, you got your target demographic down. You to that point where you understand who your best audience is. Obviously, like you said, anyone could use this, right? A lot of big companies could use this and small ones too. But you figured out who it is. So what are you doing right now? Because I'm a marketing guy. I like to hear what people are doing for marketing. What are you doing right now to get the word out? I mean, we're on a podcast. That's one. Okay. What else? How are you getting a hold of engineers in the tech space?
Totally. And, a lot of this is pretty new to us. Like the focusing in on engineers specifically is happening kind of like as we speak. So still early stages here. But the thing that works the best that we think will continue to work scalably is content. Content seems to be working pretty well for us. We have an unusual point of view on remote work in many ways. For example, blog post coming out next week about what we call objective-based recruiting. Happy to talk about it if you're interested. But so content seems to be a good source of acquisition for us. And we're trying to figure out how to scale that. Viral loops, also very effective and incredibly challenging for us. So, viral loop is basically when you give someone a reason to share and then you make it easy to share. Our product is really effective at spreading within a company. But once we are basically the tool for the company, we don't spread to the next company unless people get drinks together and talk about it, which doesn't happen as much during COVID. And so we're trying to figure out how can we let people take the value that they get within their company at Remotion and use that across companies. So that's, viral loops, the second answer there. And the third thing that we're beginning to test is actually, hey, we have this hypothesis around sales. Maybe not the number one hypothesis for target audience, but it's interesting. Let's dig in. But we don't seem to be acquiring as many teams that are in sales. So we're actually starting to test light outbound and more targeted sort of performance marketing. Very, very early experiments, but just so we can test other hypotheses with that.
Is there anything you've done that absolutely did not work? You're like, I tried this marketing and it completely failed. Like nobody cared.
Yeah. No, I mean, just so we're learning, right? We're really learning just to give you an example of how much we fell flat on our faces so many times. So the way we even got started, and so we've raised the Series A now. We've raised $13 million, which still feels ridiculous.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Although I will say in today's climate, that's not the same number as it was. But, the way that happened was we had this idea, we had this product, COVID hit and we're like, wow, our product's not ready, but we just feel bad not letting people use this because this is useful. So we put it out on a website called Product Hunt, which you probably know. And a bunch of people just signed up. We had no idea what we were doing. We just put it there and a bunch of people signed up and that usage led to our Series A, right? But we didn't earn that usage when I think about it. We just put our product on a site and people came. It's like the engineer's dream. And so I remember the first few cycles of goal setting after the Product Hunt launch, we're like, cool, we're just going to assume the line will keep going up. And it didn't because we didn't do anything. We just assumed that it would keep going up because people would talk about it. And so we've really had to learn, what are the things that work, what are the things that don't work, and how to create like discipline around getting things done. So I realized you asked like, what doesn't work? Well, obviously doing nothing doesn't work.
Yeah, sitting there and praying doesn't work, it turns out.
Yeah. Another example of something that has had a lot less results than we thought was we tried a bunch of campaigns to create shareable content around Remotion. So like, hey, you use Remotion. Remotion gives you this doc so you can see your team and who's around. And like, we try to help people feel like more than just green dots. You can take little selfies, and like some teams take it every day, other teams take them less often. The key is like to not be on live video, but to still feel present. And so we tried a bunch of campaigns around getting people to share that content. And we had a limited amount of sharing. And then those limited number of shares led to very few conversions. And at the end of the day, we did the math and we were like, yeah, like we're still a small company. Our customer base is quite small. Any sort of one-off viral campaign is just not going to yield meaningful results. And so, we've just gotten more disciplined around doing the math around like how much we think something can yield. And at this point in time, the biggest thing that we have to figure out as company is how to get more traffic. That's a bigger problem than like the virality of the product.
I've always said that, the great thing about starting a software company is that, after you build it, and there's always iterations, don't get me wrong, right? But like 80% of your equation is marketing for the most part after that. Cause like what else? Like, what is she doing? There's no warehouse of overhead. You don't have shipping departments. Like mostly it's like, okay, we built it. Now it's like, well, now it's all marketing. But let's talk about the future here, right? Future of BizTech. Got to ask the question. My first question about the future is this: where do you see your industry going, right? So, a lot of the different softwares that fall into your, realm, right, out there, where do you see like that 5-year future, right? All things considered with, between you and your competitors, where do you see things going as a whole? Do you see any, legislation affecting anything? Do you see demographics or politics affecting anything? Do you see technology really, like any kind of AI that's going to come in and disrupt? If you had to thought experiment it, where do you see your industry going in 5 years?
Totally. So I think the biggest thing, and it's pretty obvious, that will affect our industry is the change in how many companies are working remotely and how many companies are working hybrid. So, when we started the company, we assumed this was just going to be a long journey of helping more companies become remote. And that's because, I personally care about that as an immigrant. Like, the jobs in America are awesome. That's why I'm here. I want to move eventually, right? And we thought we'd be kind of helping push the market. And COVID hit, and now everyone's working remotely who can, of course, who has like a knowledge worker type job. And now as COVID is reopening, Omicron permitting, we're starting to see our customer base shift to because remember, our customer base is people who want a virtual office. So they like the idea of an office and like talking without having a scheduled meeting. Mm-hmm. We're seeing that a lot of those people who have people in the same cities are opening co-working spaces or reopening offices, mm-hmm. right? And we think that that's going to be the majority of teams who can do so. They're going to be teams who like, hey, we're going to hire the best talent that we can. If they're not in the same city, fine, we're hiring you anyways. But if you are in the same city, let's hang out once a week. Let's hang out twice a week. And so we think that the market is going to move to a predominantly hybrid model. And that's going to be yet another thing to learn. Like, teams still haven't figured out fully how to work remotely. Yeah. But there's going to be a whole nother thing, because when you have hybrid, you all of a sudden have a second-class citizen problem. Like, hey, we've got the people in the office, they're naturally becoming friends, eating lunch together. And then we've got folks who aren't in the office. How do we give them equal access to information? How do we give them equal access to promotion, to relationships? And this is going to be a major problem, because demographically, there are differences in, for example, how likely it is that a man or a woman want to come into the office when they're at parenting age, for example. Yeah. So there's a lot of big differences that are going to really matter. And so the way that I see our industry evolving is, right now we have a bunch of tools. Some of them are great for remote work. Some of them are great for hybrid work. And I think that we're going to kind of see a split where we're going to have some of the heavyweight tools out there in the space. We call it the virtual office space, by the way. Mm-hmm. They're going to remain for very remote first companies. And I think most people like seeing other people in real life sometimes. So we're going to have a different set of tools kind of going for that market. And that's going to be us. So yeah, happy to share more about that. But that's
how do you see, and this is a question I want to know, how do you see the, Web3 metaverse, playing into this, right? I mean, right now, you have Facebook coming out with, there's virtual land. That virtual land now is going to turn to virtual office buildings. And so, like, where do you see this? And are you have any plans? Like, we'll talk about you personally now, your company, but does your company have any plans to take advantage of what is most likely going to be a gold rush into a virtual environment completely. I mean, right now you got the big clunky, Oculus, headsets, right? But eventually that tech will get down to maybe glasses. So, where do you see you guys going in the future when it comes to that? Are you going to try to capitalize on that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could summarize my point of view by saying that I'm more interested in augmented reality than virtual reality. Fleshing this out a little bit, I might be one of the more crypto bears that you have on the show. I'm really interested in how crypto is leading to componentization of the financial stack. But as for myself seeing people spending most of their time in a virtual space, the entire premise of Remotion is that people like seeing other people and they like seeing them in real life or in unscheduled manners. And I think that's going to continue to be true. So I personally believe that especially as COVID subsides and people adopt more hybrid strategies, most of the product experiences that will be successful will be experiences that incorporate physical presence in an office and your remote teammates in a way that is subtle and elegant. So you're not like taking a headset off to talk to your neighbor in the office, right? So Remotion right now, totally wish I could screen share here, but it's a podcast. It's a very, very lightweight experience. It sort of sits to the side of your screen, kind of like your taskbar on Windows or your dock on Mac OS.
That's good to know, by the way, because I think a lot of people were thinking it would take up their screen.
No, so it's more of not a Mac. It's super light. And the reason we built it that way, even though like maybe it makes it less powerful for a fully remote team, is because we're thinking ahead to when people are going to be in an office and you've got your colleague I was going to say 4 meters, let's say 12 feet away from you. And then you've got some remote people and you want to keep both of those equally present in your mind. And so we started there because everyone has a laptop already who's working in this job. When AR technology becomes prevalent, we will very likely adopt that, but I don't see us getting down the VR or metaverse route.
Interesting. Okay. Personal question here before we wrap up.
Sure.
When you were a kid, like what was your dream? Like what did you want to do when you grew up, so to speak? And then is this it? And if not, how'd that path get there?
Yeah, it's crazy. So when I was a kid, well, first I wanted to be an astronaut. Then I realized I was good at math and I wanted to build things that flew. And, I don't know, I was a pretty typical young boy. I wanted to build fighter jets and missiles. And I thought America had the best ones. And that's when I decided that I would do my engineering schooling in English and come to America. And that's why I came here. And then I remember freshman year, I was, slightly tooting my own horn, but I was an incredibly qualified freshman grad. I'd already spent the summer building jet engines for the Royal Navy in the UK and everything. I remember going to the career fair and talking to Boeing, look, I've done all this stuff and I'm 18, you should hire me. And they're like, but you're not American. We can't give you clearance. We want to, maybe, we're not going to hire you. And maybe if we do, it'll be for commercial aircraft. And that's when I started really questioning my interests and ended up, realizing that what I liked most about engineering was software and programming. And then I realized, okay, I can go down this space. And as I started studying software, I realized I really enjoyed human computer interaction. And ultimately what I found most fulfilling in my life is two things. First is building things and giving them to people. I love doing onboarding calls for a product, which we still do today. And I still do, because hearing someone this morning tell me wow, this is awesome. This is going to help me so much. That really motivates me. And the second thing that I've really started to enjoy is building teams. When I was in college, I tried to start a few clubs and totally failed. I didn't know how to do it. And then as a product manager at Dropbox, I kind of saw a little bit how it could work and got really interested in that as a theme. And so, I'd say this is totally what I'm happy to be doing, but it's not the same as what I thought I would be doing when I was 14.
No, but I mean, I can relate. I thought I was gonna be a fighter pilot for a long time as a kid.
I looked into it.
Yeah. I went to Embry-Riddle, which was
nice.
You're familiar with.
Yeah, I applied to Embry-Riddle.
Yeah. It was a tough school. And then I ended up transferring out to CU Boulder, which also had a really good program as well. But yeah, it's interesting. Then I got into marketing. I was like, I never looked back. Right, this is my jam.
Nice. Yeah, at some point, I'd love to. I realize I've kind of given snippets of what Remotion is. I would love to give a tangible explanation of what it is at some point.
Let's give an example real quick here before we wrap up, for sure.
Cool. Okay, so basically, again, summarizing, as a leader, your goal is to help your team build relationships. The thesis we have is that those are built with small group conversations that are not about a specific work item. They're casual. And so Remotion gives your team space to have those. And we've tried 1,000 things, but the number one thing that you can think about as like the best example for how it works is we create co-working rooms for your team. So like in an office, you'd sit around a table, maybe there'd be a stereo playing some music. And so you're not talking, but the music creates a shared experience. And then it's super easy to just be like, oh, hey, so what do you think of the game? Yeah. And Remotion creates the same thing. So you get Remotion, you get this little doc that shows your team. And in that doc, there are rooms with music playing that's shared by everyone. Yeah. And people will hang out on mute with their cameras off for hours every day. And then from there, it's super easy to unmute. And you end up finding your team is just talking way more than they would before. And you can start canceling meetings and they start bonding more. So that's what our product provides.
That's actually really cool, right? So you can share some music. All right. That's a great example because I want to check this out. We'll talk after this. I want to demo some of this here because I have some interest.
Yeah, sure.
This is cool. Well, how about this? How can people reach you personally or the company if they are interested in the product or service or high level deals if they're trying to talk to you?
Yeah, sounds good. So our website is remotion.com, remotion.com. And I'm Alexander at remotion.com. Feel free to email me. Just mention that it's from the podcast. Super happy to chat about anything really. Otherwise, I'm Embirico on Twitter. It's EMBIRICO. And I'd love to chat.
Awesome. And listen, for everyone else listening out there, again, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to subscribe to this podcast, give it a 5-star rating with a little bit of comments behind it so other techies like us can find it and enjoy learning about all these amazing and helpful B2B softwares on the market today. Alexander, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm very interested in your software and I look forward to my own little demo with it.
Thanks for having me, JC.
Bye.